You're about to witness something no one in this university has ever dared to do. Stand up to the most feared professor on campus and win. That's how it all started. It was a day like any other at Liberty Springs University, but the energy in Lecture Hall 304 was different, thicker. Students filed in, murmuring to each other, some exchanging nervous glances. They weren't here just for a class. They were here for a showdown. At the front of the room stood Professor Richard Anderson, an intellectual powerhouse, a man whose reputation for tearing students apart was legendary. He wasn't just a professor, he was a hunter. And his prey? Anyone who believed in God, and today he had found his next target. Sitting in the middle of the lecture hall was Barron Trump, 6'7", sharp-eyed, unreadable. Some students admired him, some resented him, but one thing was clear: he didn't belong in this trap. Professor Anderson took a slow breath, scanning the room. Then, with a smirk, he pressed a button on his remote. Boom! A massive screen lit up, behind him, displaying 5 words that immediately sent a wave of tension through the hall. Why smart people don't believe in God. A few students gasped, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Anderson let the moment sink in. He knew exactly what he was doing. Every semester, this was his favorite lesson. The professor turned, his voice calm but laced with sharpness. "All right. Class," he began. "Let's talk about reality." He took a slow step forward, his polished shoes tapping against the floor like a judge walking into a courtroom. We live in a world driven by science, facts, reason. And yet, some people, against all logic, against all evidence, still believe in an invisible man in the sky. His eyes flicked toward Barron. A few students chuckled. Others glanced at Barron, expecting him to shrink. He didn't. Anderson continued, voice dripping with amusement. "We have mapped the human genome, discovered black holes, split the atom. And yet, some people still cling to ancient myths written by people who thought the earth was flat." Laughter. The professor smiled. He knew how this would go. It was the same every semester. Some student, desperate to defend their beliefs, would stammer out a response. And he, like a lion with a cornered gazelle, would tear their argument to pieces. "Tell me," Anderson said, his gaze locked on Barron now. "Why would any intelligent person in the 21st century still believe in a fairy tale?" Silence. The moment stretched. Students leaned in, anticipating the kill. And then something happened that no one expected. Barron Trump stood up, not quickly, not nervously. No. He rose slowly, deliberately, like a chess master making the first move in a deadly game. The room went dead silent. This wasn't part of Anderson's script, and for the first time in his entire career, Professor Richard Anderson wasn't sure if he was the smartest man in the room anymore. The room held its breath, every pair of eyes locked onto Barron Trump as he slowly straightened his towering frame. Even the air in the room felt heavier, thick with an unspoken challenge. Professor Anderson's smirk didn't waver, but something in his eyes flickered, a hesitation, barely noticeable but there. Barron finally spoke. "Professor Anderson," he said, voice steady, deep. "You say only foolish people believe in God. So tell me, are you absolutely certain God doesn't exist?" A few students blinked. This wasn't the nervous, scrambling response they were used to seeing. No shaky defenses, no emotional outbursts, just a simple, calculated question. Anderson chuckled. A trap? He'd been teaching for 20 years. He'd seen every trick. "Of course I am," he said smoothly, arms crossing over his chest. "There's no evidence. No proof, just ancient texts and superstition." Barron took a step forward, and for the first time, Anderson felt something strange. Pressure. "So you're absolutely certain?" 100%? Barron asked again. Tilting his head, Anderson scoffed. "That's what I said." And that's when Barron struck. "Then that makes you irrational." Silence. A few students sat up, some even leaned in. This wasn't going the way it was supposed to. Anderson's smirk faltered for half a second before he forced out a laugh. "Irrational?" he echoed, shaking his head. Kid, science is based on facts. And real science, Barron interrupted, his voice like steel, leaves room for doubt. Anderson's jaw clenched. Barron continued. You claim to be a man of science, but every real scientist knows that absolute certainty is impossible. Einstein left room for doubt. Hawking left room for doubt. You, however, Barron paused, his eyes narrowing, have decided you know more than them? Boom. The room shifted. Murmurs. A few students exchanged glances. Professor Anderson wasn't smiling anymore. That's a clever trick, he said, forcing a chuckle. But let's be real. There's no evidence for God. None. Barron didn't flinch. None? He raised an eyebrow. Let's test that. And then, in a move that no one saw coming, Barron reached into his backpack and pulled out something that made the entire room gasp. A massive leather-bound book, but not just any book, a NASA research log. Anderson stared. This, Barron said, flipping it open to a bookmarked page, is from NASA's 1973 Space Anomaly Report, declassified in 2019. Would you like to read what they found? Anderson's throat tightened. Because he knew that report. It was the one document scientists never talked about. The one that described an event no one could explain. An anomaly, detected just beyond Pluto's orbit, where the laws of physics had bent. An area where light moved differently, where time distorted, where every equation failed. Some called it a glitch in the universe. Others, a doorway. And now, Barron Trump was standing in front of an entire class holding evidence. The class was dead silent. Professor Anderson's mind raced. He needed to regain control. Fast. He forced a smirk. And what exactly does that prove? Barron shut the book with a thud. It proves that science hasn't explained everything. He stepped forward again. And if science hasn't explained everything, another step. Then dismissing God completely, another, is not just arrogance. Now he was standing directly in front of Anderson. It's bad science, and for the first time ever, Professor Richard Anderson had no response. The tension in the room was unbearable. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a battle, and Barron Trump had just landed a direct hit. Professor Anderson's face was unreadable, but something in his posture had shifted. His confidence wasn't gone, but it was wounded. The students? They were completely locked in. This wasn't the same boring lecture they'd sat through 100 times. This was something else. Something alive. Anderson finally exhaled, shaking, his head. All right, he said. You've given me an interesting argument, but it's nothing more than that. An argument. Barron smirked. Oh, I'm just getting started. Then, he did something no one expected. He reached into his bag again. Another book? No, a tablet. He tapped the screen, and a live feed popped up on the massive projector behind Anderson. A real-time, high-definition image of deep space. Anderson frowned. What am I looking at? Barron's eyes gleamed. The James Webb Space Telescope, NASA's latest scans from the Bode's Void. A murmur swept through the classroom. The Bode's Void, one of the biggest mysteries in modern astronomy. A section of the universe so impossibly empty, it shouldn't exist. A place where for nearly 300 million light-years, there were almost no galaxies, no stars, no anything. A cosmic desert. A void where, mathematically, there should be something. But there wasn't. And now, it was being broadcast live in front of them. Anderson crossed his arms. And what exactly am I supposed to see? Barron's smile didn't fade. That's the thing, Professor. No one knows. But 2 weeks ago, something changed. He tapped the screen again, pulling up an enhanced image. A single dot of light appears in the void. Small, faint, but there. Anderson leaned in, squinting. A star, Barron shook his head. Too large, too structured, and it's growing. Silence. The professor swallowed. Growing. Barron nodded. Over the last 14 days, that point of light has doubled in size. Scientists don't know what it is. It doesn't behave like a star. It doesn't emit radiation like a quasar. It's something new. Anderson forced a laugh, but it was thin. So, new things are discovered all the time. That doesn't mean it's supernatural. Barron raised a finger. I never said it was. Another tap. Another image. And this one sent chills through the room. Because the light wasn't just growing. It was moving, and it wasn't random. It was traveling directly toward Earth. Silence. A few students looked at each other. One girl shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Anderson cleared his throat. All right, you're good at theatrics. I'll give you that. Barron didn't flinch. Theatrics? Professor, I just showed you an unexplained growing cosmic entity that's moving in our direction. That's not theatrics. Anderson opened his mouth, then closed it. Because, for the first time, he didn't have a single counterpoint. Barron continued, voice calm, controlled. For centuries, humans thought they understood the universe, and every time we thought we had all the answers, something shattered our understanding. He stepped forward. Newton thought space was fixed. Einstein proved it wasn't. Physicists thought atoms were the smallest thing. Then came quantum mechanics. Now we assume life can only exist in a carbon-based system. But what if we're wrong again? His voice lowered, almost a whisper. What if we're being watched? Anderson scoffed. Watched? He shook his head. You sound like a conspiracy theorist. Barron's smirk returned. I sound like someone who keeps an open mind. Isn't that what science is supposed to be? A ripple of agreement moved through the class. Anderson's jaw tightened. Barron's eyes never left. His checkmate. A thick silence settled over the classroom. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of Barron's words lingered in the air like an electrical charge before a storm. Professor Anderson's fingers drummed against the podium. A nervous habit, Barron noted. The once unshakable scientist was processing. Then, in a voice that was a little too controlled, Anderson said, All right, you've got my attention. But if this light is heading toward us, what's your theory? Barron took a deep breath, then clicked the tablet again. The image shifted. Data charts, radio signals, frequency spectrums. I'm glad you asked. The screen zoomed in on the mysterious glowing object, now noticeably larger than in the previous images. Barron pointed at a waveform graph pulsing at the bottom of the screen. 2 days ago, astronomers detected something strange. This object isn't just moving, it's emitting a repeating signal, Anderson scoffed. Pulsars emit signals. That doesn't make them intelligent. Barron's smirk didn't fade. True. But pulsars don't transmit prime numbers. In perfect sequence, the room collectively inhaled. One student murmured, No way. Barron nodded. Yes, way. The signal isn't random. It's structured. Every 33 minutes it transmits the first 10 prime numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, all the way to 29. He let the weight of that sink in. Professor Anderson rubbed his temples. You're telling me this wee thing was sending a mathematical message? That's exactly what I'm telling you. The room wasn't just silent now. It was on edge. One student, a girl in the back, raised her hand hesitantly. Why prime numbers? Barron turned to her. Because prime numbers are universal. They're not tied to any one language, culture, or species. If someone, was trying to communicate across time and space, prime numbers are the logical choice. The professor wasn't convinced. Let's assume this is true, he said carefully. Why is it moving toward us? Barron's fingers tightened on the tablet. Then, slowly, he pulled up a final image, a transmission log from an observatory in New Mexico. Yesterday's date, and next to it, a translated message, not just numbers. Words. One student whispered, No way. The text was simple, but it was chilling. We have found you. Anderson stiffened. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Barron locked eyes with him. Still think this is just a theory? The professor's hands curled into fists. His brain was scrambling for a rational explanation, but none came. Then, another student, his voice barely above a whisper, asked, "What if they're friendly?" Barron didn't answer right away. He let the question hang in the air. Then he said, "And what if they're not?" A cold shiver ran through the classroom. "We have found you." Those 4 words sat on the screen like an open wound, seeping unease into the room. The once fidgeting students were now motionless, their breath shallow. Professor Anderson's face was pale, his knuckles white as he gripped the podium. Barron let the silence stretch, watching as the weight of reality settled over them. Then finally he dropped the real bombshell. That message wasn't the last one. The screen glitched. A new transmission log appeared. Time-stamped 3:17 a.m. this morning. Another set of words. Prepare for contact. A collective gasp. Someone cursed under their breath. A chair scraped against the floor as a student involuntarily scooted backward, as if the very words carried some kind of force. Professor Anderson's voice was hoarse. "When?" Barron's face was stone. He tapped the screen, pulling up a new set of astronomical coordinates. A trajectory projection. It enters Earth's atmosphere in less than 6 hours. Pandemonium. Students erupted into whispers, gasps, and theories. A girl near the front laughed nervously, shaking her head. "This has to be a joke." Barron didn't flinch. "I wish it was." Anderson ran a shaking hand through his graying hair. He had spent his life debunking conspiracy theories, but this wasn't some blurry UFO sighting or a hoax spread by online forums. This was cold, hard data. He turned back to Barron. "NASA, the government, the military. What are they doing?" Barron hesitated. That hesitation alone sent a fresh wave of fear through the room. "Nothing." "Nothing?" Anderson's voice cracked. "You're telling me an unidentified intelligent entity is coming straight for us and we're just... what? Waiting? Hoping for the best?" Barron exhaled sharply. "I was briefed by an insider at NASA. They're scrambling, but let's be real. There's no protocol for this. This isn't a rogue satellite. It's not an asteroid. We have no idea what we're dealing with." And then, as if the universe itself had been listening, the power cut out. The room was swallowed in darkness. For a moment, there was only breathing. The sharp intake of air, the subtle shifting of bodies, the distant hum of something mechanical, winding down. Then outside, a deep, unearthly rumble. Barron's pulse spiked. That wasn't thunder. Emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie, flickering shadows. The projector screen, now blank, glowed red as a backup system kicked in. Anderson reached for his phone. No signal. The students did the same. Same result. A boy near the window whispered, "Oh my God." Every head turned. He was staring outside, his face pale, eyes wide. Barron followed his gaze. Outside, in the sky above the city, something was descending. Not a shooting star. Not a meteor. Something massive. A shimmering, obsidian-like object, easily the size of a football stadium, was slowly breaking through the cloud cover. Its edges rippled, almost like liquid metal, shifting and reforming in ways that didn't seem possible. And it was silent. Unnaturally, impossibly silent. No roaring engines, no sonic boom. Just there. Watching. A girl grabbed Barron's arm. "What do we do?" For the first time that night, Barron had no answer. What if this isn't just a story? What if we're not alone and haven't been for a long time? The unknown isn't just in space, it's in our lives every day. Fear or curiosity, fight or adapt. The real question is, are we ready? Drop your thoughts below, because the future is closer than you think. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. Stay tuned for more.